74b, first of the wide lines. Again, the discussion of the Mishnah was if a guy divorces his wife with the condition that she pay him 200 zuz. So if she pays him the money, the divorce is valid. If she doesn't pay, the divorce is not valid. And I have an interesting question. We spoke about, we mentioned this yesterday, we'll briefly review it again today. If a guy sells a property during the time when Yovel is in effect, then at the end of the 50 years, the property goes back to the original owners. During the year of Yovel, the conclusion of the Yovel. The exception to that is a guy who sells a guy who sells a house in a city with a wall. The seller has 1 year to redeem the property. After that, the buyer gets to keep it in perpetuity. So we learned Tanat Hasim. We learned what people used to do is if they bought a property, the last day that was the last day or maybe the last few days were responsible for the guy to redeem it. The fellow would go hide, because if he hides, the guy doesn't have any way to give him the money. There's no way for him to redeem it. Hiskin Hill Azalkan. So Hill created the following decree: there was a special room, and you put the money in the room. The and if you put the correct amount of money in, you could break the door and take back your house. The aim says and whenever the buyer wants, he can go into the room and take the money. Okay. But Rava says Rava, from this decree of Hill, we see as follows. If somebody says, he tells his wife, I'm giving you a divorce on condition that you give me 200 zuz. And what happens? What?
He disappears.
Exactly. If he gives her the money, if he accepts the money willingly, then the divorce is valid. Al karcha, but let's say he doesn't want to take the money, then she's not divorced. How do we know this? The fact that Hill has to say that that giving the money against the receiver's will is still considered giving the money. You can take back the property. Similarly, with regard to anything else, without a specific decree, giving the money to someone against their will is not sufficient to be considered giving them the money, and therefore, in this scenario, the divorce would not be valid. So the Gemara says it's not a valid proof. Maskat or Papa says the Itema Rav Sim Barash, and some say it's Rav Sim Barash. If Dilma, there's no proof. Says your Papa, hold on, maybe there's a difference here. Maybe it depends whether you're giving him in front of him or not. Because if he's present and you give it to him against his will, there's no evidence to say that would not be valid. So, in other words, it could be that when he's not present, it was necessary to make such a decree. Because when he's not present, you can't force the money in his face. But when he is present, maybe you could. Maybe if you force the money in his face, then you would be able to, and theoretically, you would redeem the house, even without Hill's takana. And similarly, with regard to divorce, so there's no proof. Gemara is a slightly different version of this same price. So we're on 75a, about 5 lines down. The Ikeda, and some say, Rava says, from this decree of Hill, we see as follows. Here is a divorce on condition that you give me 200 zuz. And he gave her the money, whether she gave him the money, whether he agreed or whether he disagreed. Having a sina is valid in either scenario. Having a sina. So, according to this second version, Rabbi says as follows: if the woman gives her soon-to-be ex-husband the money, if he's present, then even if she forces the money at him, she's divorced. that's acceptable. Why? Because the only reason for Hill to enact the decree was because people were disappearing. If they weren't disappearing, then even if they refused payment, you'd be able to give it to them in person. And that would be sufficient.
So if they disappear.
So if they disappear, that's where Hill says, guess what? Tough luck. You just put it into the safe deposit box. Here's the key. Take it whenever you want.
Does it escrow?
Well, escrow, effectively.
So divorce is effective.
No, so according to this version, if she gave him the money in front of, when she literally gave it to him, even if he refuses the money, it's tough luck. Divorce is valid. The decree of Hill was only when the fellow buying the field, buying the house in the walled city, fortified city, he ran away. If he didn't run away, there would be no reason for Hill to create a law. Masculine Republic says not necessarily. The Tamer of Rashi, and some say it was Rasim Barashi, Vidilma, Afilu, Bifanav Nami, Vidaiti in Akar Chaloi, the Hill my Itzrikle Itkin. It could be that there's no difference between in person or when he's not present. In both scenarios, if he directly refuses payment, then the refusal is a valid refusal. I.e., at that once because he refused payment, therefore the money can't be given. However, apparently what would happen in Hill's times was that if you met the guy in person, he couldn't refuse it. He just wouldn't do it. So if he wouldn't do it, then there wasn't any problem. Hill's decree was only relevant when the guy ran away and he was not present.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be that Hill would agree that if a guy just stood there and refused to take the money, it could be the house, in the first period, the house would not be redeemed. And therefore, the Gemara remains inconclusive. Okay. Okay, getting back to the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Barchana says in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, Kol Wakam Shana Rav Shimon Gamliel Mishasenu Allah Chamaitz Chutz Erev Tzidin V'Rayach Rayna. Okay, our Mishnah Rav Shimon Gamliel brings a story, and that's his opinion, that if a guy says, "Here's a divorce on condition that you give me your coat or my coat," and the coat got lost or got burned or disappeared, so Shimon Gamliel says that she can give him the money, the monetary value of the coat. Says Rabba in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, typically the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, with the exception of three different laws. Orav hayotzi achar chitim shtaris, which we saw, that is where the guarantor is signed after the document. The guarantor was not signed at the moment the document was signed. It's a post hoc guarantor. I don't remember exactly what the machlekes there is. It's machlekes whether or not it works or not. I don't remember who says which one. Tzidain is our Gemara, the story of Tzidain, which relates to the question of the coat, whether you can give the monetary value of the coat or you need to give the coat itself. And Rayach Rayna is where the guy brings a proof after the window closes. So basically, this is somewhat analogous to what we do today in modern courts. And typically in a criminal trial, when there's a jury trial, so everybody has to line up their evidence in advance, right? And the judge decides sort of what is admissible, what's not admissible, and then they go to trial using the evidence that's already predetermined. What happens if evidence is found in the middle of the trial? It's a problem. They might have to kick out the jury and see what they can do about it. Maybe there'll be an appeal because of it, etc. Now, similarly, guy makes a claim. He says, "Oh, you $100." The guy says, "I paid you back. You have proof that you paid me back?" No. Yeah, I do have proof. I just have to get it. It's going to take me 250 days to get it. So there's a certain period we give him 30 days. What happens if they have 30 days? For whatever reason, the court date had to be pushed off for a little bit. Now the guy comes back into court with the document. He claims he has evidence. Do you believe it or not? So this is a debate again. I don't know who says who, but the halacha is not like Rosh Gamliel. Okay. Next Gemara. Tanar Rabbanan. Harei gitcha v'hananaya or shali. Here is a divorce, but the paper remains with me. Eina megarashes, the divorce is not valid. Almanatz shetachziri etzanayer, on condition that you return to me the piece of paper. Then we say megarashes, the divorce is valid. Ma'ishna ratio, ma'ishna seifa. What is the difference in the first part and the second part? Okay. I believe the Gemara here gives 4 or 5 answers. 4 or 5 different responses. Let's just understand what's the question. The first scenario, there was no real condition. He just says, here's divorce, but the paper is mine. And the second scenario is where he makes a condition. He says almanas, on condition. The condition is fulfilled by the paper being given back to the husband. That's sort of the difference. We'll try to identify other differences. Amar of Chizr says, Hamani Rav Shimon Gamliel. The difference here is, this is the opinion of Rav Shimon Gamliel. The Amar Titin La'es Tamel. Rav Shimon Gamliel says that you can give either the coat or the value of the coat. Similarly over here, if he claims that he wants the paper back, the divorce would not be valid. But she doesn't have to give him the paper back. All she needs to do is give him the value of the paper. And that's why in the second scenario it works. So the Gemara says, Masif Abaya asks, Abaya is the obvious question here. Shimon says that if the code is destroyed, then you can give money. But if the code is extant, it's still around, then you can't give money. You have to give the code itself. So over here, if the justification is that you have to sort of give the divorce, you have to give back the piece of paper, the document itself. Shimon would say that as long as the document is extant, you need to give back the document. It's only if the document disappears that you wouldn't have to give back the documents. Then you give money instead. So therefore, that can't be the difference between the first and second scenarios of the brisa.
Why would she? She needs the paper, doesn't it?
Not really. So she needs it for proof, but technically speaking, there are ways around that. For example, let's say the court knows. So the Gemara says there was a time period where the Romans did not allow them to. The Romans would kill anybody if they found a religious document in their house. So what would they do? They would get divorced. They'd get witnesses, and then they destroy the divorce afterwards. So and the witnesses would serve sort of as the proof. So that could technically work.
Remember that.
Okay. Okay. Second response. The Amar Abaya says, "Hamani Rameiri." The Amar Beina tonight. Kafel v'hochal kafel tonight. Okay. Go a little bit. We have the conditions. How do we know that a condition works? That you can sort of create a negating effect in an executed agreement through what's called a condition. An answer for that is the agreement between the children of Gad and Reuven, and eventually afterwards half the Shebet and Menashe that joined them with Moshe Rabbeinu. They wanted a portion of the land of Israel to be on the other side of the Jordan River. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, fine, if you go ahead and fight, then you'll get a portion. And if you don't go ahead and fight, then your portion will be amongst everybody else. Anyone notice what I just said? Moshe Rabbeinu said as follows: if you go and fight, you'll get a portion across the river. And if you don't go ahead and fight, then you'll get like everybody else. We'll take the land of Israel, we'll cut it into 12 portions instead of into 10. Or in the case, it's actually 9.5 instead of 12. Whatever. Now, what was the key thing that I just said? There was a double condition. If you go, this is what happens. And if you don't go, then this is what happens. Right? So in the programming language, this is if and else. Right? Right? If you do this, then fine. And else, otherwise, this is what's going to happen. So it says, and okay, there's another few other things I'll notice to you. I'll point out. What was the condition? First, what was said was, if you go ahead and fight, the positive side. In other words, what do you want? You want the land outside, you want the land on the other side of the Jordan River, right? If you go ahead and fight, this is the hain, the positive of what you actually want, then you get the property. And if you don't, that's the negative side. What happens if you don't fulfill the condition? The else, that comes second. Just give me a second. Okay. One more point, which is that, what do you want here? What do the children of Gad and Reuven want? They wanted the property. What do they need to do to get the property? They needed to fight. Two separate things, right? As opposed to a condition that reflects the item itself. We'll explain that in a moment. Okay, the Gemara will go through each one of these points that I'm bringing out. The Gemara will discuss. Regardless, there's a major question throughout Talmud, which is: does a conditional agreement, in order for it to be effective, does it have to match the structure of the original agreement? And the opinion of Rameir is that it does. And one of the things Rameir requires is what's called a Tanai Kofel. Tanai Kofel means if you go fight, then you get the land of Israel that you want. If you don't fight, then we split land of Israel into 12 portions. And you get what everybody else gets. Okay. Rameir, the Omar, the Ian Tanai Kofel. Rameir says you need a Tanai Kofel, Hachal Lekafel tonight. Okay. Now, this is a little bit sugil. Go just take a little tangent here. There's no evidence here in this Bryce that you actually made it Tanai Kofel. The Gemara is presuming that. It could be that the Gemara is just saying that is the difference. In the first scenario, you did not make it Tanai Kofel. And the second Tanai Kofel is the fact that you said the positive, the if and the else.
Oh.
And the second scenario is where you did say if and else. But there's another possibility, which I believe is what it's machlekes for Shainim actually. And it could be if you say almanas, you don't need to say if else. I'll explain as follows. Why are you saying if and else? Because you're trying to make it clear that it's an if-then condition. Right? Now, if you say, here's divorce and the paper is mine, it's not clear what you mean there. Do you mean an if and else? You mean it's a conditional requirement? Maybe you just mean that divorce stays mine the whole time. I'm never giving you the documents. It's always mine. You just get I don't know, the transaction words. I don't know what it is. You get the value of the document, but the paper remains mine. That divorce would not be valid in that scenario because the document actually has to be given. It's not clear. That's why you need an if and else statement, which would be something like, here's the divorce. If the document comes back to me, the divorce is valid. If the document doesn't come back, the divorce is not valid. But where you said almanas on condition, so we know it's a conditional document. We know it's a condition here. There's no need to double the condition to say if else, because if it's a condition, obviously it's an if else. The whole reason why it's necessary to point out an if and else is, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, you want land in the Jordan River? Go ahead and fight with me. Well, what does that mean? We don't know what it means. It's not clear that it's a conditional requirement. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu says, if you come and fight, you get the land. If you don't come and fight, you don't get it. You don't get it. You get like everybody else. But if Moshe Rabbeinu would have told them, you want the land across the Jordan on condition that you go ahead and fight, almanas, then there would be no need for Tanai Kofel. Could be this Gemara is a proof to that. So then the difference here is, because he said almanas, there's no need for Tanai Kofel.
It's such a subtle difference.
Correct.
Such a subtle difference.
So in other words, there is an opinion that says that almanas is implied the if else. It's an implicit if else. Okay, that's a side point, but okay. If you don't get that part, that's not necessary. Okay, whatever it is, the two different opinions in the Bryce. So one's a Tanai Kofel, one's not a Tanai Kofel, and we're going to Rameir, which requires that Maskala Rava questions. Time and like Hakafel Tanai lo have a get. But everyone would agree that if there was a Tanai Kofel, then 1 second, hold on, sorry, 1 second. Okay. Okay. Rava points out as follows: if a Tanai Kofel is required, then when a Tanai Kofel is made, then the condition is valid, and therefore, if the condition is valid, the divorce must go back to the husband. However, because the divorce must be in the woman's hands, the husband has to actually give the divorce. So therefore, the divorce is not valid. However, if he did not double the Tanai, then we say that the condition is not a valid condition. And then the operating principle is Tanai Batul L'Maisa Kayam. The condition is not valid, but the action is valid. I.e., the divorce is valid, and there's no requirement to return the piece of paper. Okay, fine. But hold on a second, we have a different problem here. Let's see. Every condition, where do we know it from? From the children of God and Reuven. Just like over there, the condition has to come before the action of kol Tanai Kodem L'Maisa. Okay, so what does this mean? Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you go ahead and fight, then you get the property. Otherwise, if you don't go ahead and fight, then you get everything. The condition statement is first, then the result, the then statement happens afterwards. First if, then. Over here, we don't have that. Over here in this story, the guy says it's a divorce, and then the action, it's a divorce, and then he puts the condition afterwards. So he didn't fulfill the requirement. The divorce here is not valid because the condition is the action is before the condition. Okay, so 1 second. Can I borrow these? Yeah. Okay, so one second. So Rav is saying here that the second portion of the brisa that says the divorce is valid, it's because the condition was not valid. The condition was stated after the action. The divorce is the action. The condition is afterwards. If you give me back the document, because the condition is invalid, therefore the action is valid and the divorce is valid. Okay. And the first part of the brisa either disagrees with this requirement, and therefore the first part of the brisa would say the divorce is not valid because the condition is valid, because they disagree with this requirement. Mascot Rabbi Dovid Yehudah questions time of the Ma'aseh Kodel Tanai Kodel Ma'aseh Lo Have Gittin. The reason why the divorce is valid is because the condition is invalid. That's why the divorce is valid. But if the condition was valid because it was stated before the action, then the divorce would be invalid because it would require the woman to give back the documents. Where do we know that the concept of condition exists? From the children of Gad and Reuben. Okay, what does this mean? Typically, in order for a condition to work, the condition and the action have to be in two separate areas. For example, the condition is go to war. The action is you get property. You get your portion of the land in Israel where you would like it. Over here, the condition and the action are the same thing. It's who gets to keep the documents, which is the action of the divorce. Divorce is that she gets the document. The condition is saying she doesn't get the document. You can't make such a condition. The reason why the divorce is valid is because the condition is in the document itself, and therefore the condition is not valid, and the action is valid, and the divorce is valid. Okay. Ravashi gives another possibility. Hamani Rabbi Yehudah Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Kol Amar Amanaska Amar Me'ashav Dami. Okay. This is the most intuitive response, I think. Very simple. According to Rabbi, the answer is very simple. The condition was a valid condition in both scenarios for whatever reason. But where you said almanas, what you're saying is the divorce is valid today. In this condition, you have to give me back the piece of paper at a later point in time. But today I'm giving you the paper. Whereas in the first scenario of the Mishnah, the first scenario of the Brisa, he never gave her the paper. So you can't give it. The divorce is not valid if you didn't give over the paper. In the second scenario where he made a condition that there's a requirement at a later point that the document has to be given back, at the moment they gave a divorce, the document belonged to her. And therefore the divorce is valid. She just needs to give back a piece of paper. It's saying divorce is valid today. In a couple of days now, you owe me a piece of paper. Okay.
It's almost as if the word unconditioned Israel, it should be with a condition.
Well, why is that?
At least in my mind, unconditioned means that the condition's got to happen before the thing can take effect. With a condition means
Fair enough. Yeah, could be.
With a condition means kind of post facto.
Yeah.
Unconditioned means a priori.
That would be the debate between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehudah we saw yesterday. But yeah, I think the intention, according to Rav Huna, according to Rabbi here, would be with a condition. That is correct. Okay. Iskin Shmuel, 5 lines down from 75b. Iskin Shmuel begit shivera in loy mesi loy heget v'mesi heget. If a guy's terminally ill, he wants to divorce his wife. Let's say he doesn't want her to fall to yibum or something similar. So he writes a divorce. If I don't die, it should not be a get. If I die, it should be a get. So Gemara says, let him write, if I die, it should be a divorce. If I don't die, it should not be a divorce. So Gemara says, a person doesn't want to say the story of if he dies first. So first he says the story if he doesn't die. It's not a divorce. Then he says the story which is his real intent if he dies. It shouldn't be a divorce if I don't die. Gemara says, the condition has to be before the action. So it's if I don't die, then it's a divorce. Then it's not a divorce. If I do die, then it is a divorce. Condition is first, action is second. Rav has a question. Rav is a problem here. You need to put the positive action, which is the purpose of what he's doing it, meaning if I die, then it should be a divorce, before the statement of the law, which is if I don't die, it shouldn't be a divorce. So Rav says you say 3 times, basically. This is what you do. If I don't die, it should not be divorce. If I do die, it should be divorce. And if I don't die, it should not be divorce. You got it? The first time you say, if I don't die, it shouldn't be a divorce because the person doesn't want to talk about his death, the first thing. Then he says the condition, which is if I die, it should be a divorce. And then if I don't die, it shouldn't be a divorce. So that's how you get the positive before the negative. If I don't die, it should not be divorce. If I die, it should be divorce. If I don't die, it shouldn't be divorce. 3 times. You start off with saying, if I don't die, it shouldn't be a divorce because that's how it should start. You don't want to talk about death. And then you say, again, you have the positive before the positive, meaning the effectuation of the divorce, before the negative, the withdrawal, the end, the non-divorce happening if he doesn't die. He withdraws the documents. Okay. What's in the Mishnah? The guy says, I'm divorcing you on condition that you serve my father. Or that on condition that you nurse the child. How long does she have to nurse him? 2 years. Yehudah says 18 months. If the son dies or the father dies, then the divorce is valid. Okay, now it would seem to me, I don't see this inside, but it seems to me that we're talking a scenario where the father is terminally ill. Like we mentioned in the past, you cannot give an open-ended condition to it. Let's say a guy can't say, I'm divorcing you on condition you never ride a car again. It's not a valid divorce. Presumably the father here was terminally ill. So therefore it's sort of a limited condition, until he lives, which is going to be, I don't know, a month, 2 months, however long his life expectancy is. Once they die, and the divorce is valid because she fulfills the obligation, she fulfills the condition as long as it's necessary until they die, basically, and then it's no longer necessary and the condition is fulfilled. Here he says 2 years you have to serve my father. Or 2 years for you to nurse my son. Okay, so in this scenario, he says 2 years worth of nursing, 2 years worth of service to my father. Then what happens? The child died, and the father says, I don't want you to serve me anymore. And it's not because of her fault. It's not her fault. She didn't do anything, didn't say anything mean to him. He just doesn't want it anymore. Ain't a get, it's not a valid divorce. Why is it not a valid divorce? Because she didn't fulfill the condition. The condition was 2 years worth of nursing. He didn't nurse for 2 years. Shmuel disagrees and says it is a valid divorce. If it wasn't her problem, she wasn't the one who caused it, then the divorce remains valid. And again, the halacha obviously here is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, because always the halacha is like Rav Shimon Gamliel, except for the 3 scenarios. One of them was the previous Mishnah. Okay. Does she actually have to nurse him for either 18 months or 2 years? The Brisa says, if she served the father for 1 day, or she nursed the child 1 day, the divorce is valid. Rav Chizda says, it's not difficult. This is a question between the rabbis and Rav Shimon Gamliel. The Mishnahs of Shimon Gamliel that requires you to actually fulfill the condition for 2 years or 18 months. And the Brisa is talking about the rabbi's opinion where 1 day is sufficient because the guy didn't give a specified amount of time. You nurse the kid 1 day, that's enough. The Gemara says that can't be. If the end of the Mishnah is talking about mentions the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, clearly he's not the author in the first part of the Mishnah. So the Gemara says as follows: presumably Rav Shimon Gamliel is lenient when it comes to conditions. How do we know this? Because Rav Shimon Gamliel says that if you make condition that she has to give you her coat, you can give the money value instead of the coat if the coat is lost. So presumably Rav Shimon Gamliel is also lenient. If he says nurse my child, he just means nurse him even 1 day. That's enough. He never said 2 years in a scenario where he didn't say 2 years, and therefore 1 day is sufficient. Rava says like Ash, it's not difficult. Kam b'stam, kam b'mefarish. Ravashi's Rava's opinion here is fairly simple. He says as follows: if you say one day, then you mean one day, and the Bright is talking about where you said one day. The Mishnah is talking about stam. Stam, what is it? Stam meaning without specification. What do you typically mean? You mean as long as necessary. How long is it necessary to serve a kid, to nurse a kid? Either 2 years or 18 months. So that's what we're referring to. Kama stam, kama farash. Ravashi says, kol stam nami kama farash yom echad. Without specification, you also mean one day. 1 second.
And the condition of the year, the 18 months.
So the Mishnah has two scenarios. The first scenario is without specification. He just says, nurse my child.
Oh, okay.
And that's where there's debate whether it's 18 months or 2 years. The second scenario is where he says 2 years. Okay. Ravashi also says when a guy says nurse my son, he doesn't mean nurse him for the whole 2 years or 18 months. He means one day. Tanan, let's see our Mishnah. According to Rav, this makes a lot of sense. When he did not specify how long he wants her to nurse, and it either means 2 years or 18 months. That makes sense. Why do you have to nurse for 2 years or 18 months? He never specified how long he wants, and the law of where you don't specify is one day. The Gemara says you're right. It means when we talk about 2 years and 18 months, it means of the 2, you have 2 years to nurse him for one day. You have 18 months to nurse him for one day. If you nurse him for one day after the 18 months or after the 2 years, then it's not valid. Divorce will not be valid. One day within the 18-month or 2 year period, she has to nurse him. But after the 18-month, 2 year period, if she nurses him, she does not fulfill the condition, and therefore the divorce is not valid.
I have a question. During that 18 months or 2 years in which she is required to nurse, is she married or divorced?
So that would be a good question. It goes back what we saw yesterday. What's the status in between? Let's make this clear. She certainly cannot get remarried. That's for sure, because she won't fulfill the condition. In terms of whether or not she's divorced, so that probably goes back to the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehudah that we saw yesterday. Sort of how to understand the general position of tonight. I believe the halacha follows Rav Huna, which means that she is divorced, but again, she can't get remarried until the condition is fulfilled. Okay, Meisvei, the Gemara's question. Just finish this last line and then we'll stop. The second half of the Mishnah, he says 2 years, 2 years of nursing, 2 years of serving my father. Let's say the child dies or the father says, I don't want you to serve me. The first opinion, the unnamed opinion, says the divorce is not valid because you need to do the full 2 years. According to Rava, that this makes sense. Say for the parish. The first scenario in the Mishnah is where he did not specify. The second scenario of the Mishnah is where he did specify 2 years. And that's why where he did not specify and the child dies, then the divorce is valid. But if he did specify 2 years and the child dies, you didn't do 2 years, so therefore the divorce is not valid. El Ravashi, Ma'ishna Reisha, or Ma'ishna Seifa. According to Ravashi, the first part of the Mishnah and the second part of the Mishnah have to be the same thing. I'll explain to you why. Because according to Ravashi, what's the first part of the Mishnah? Where he didn't say anything. And what does it mean? It means 1 day within 2 years. And we're talking about he died, the kid dies. What does it mean the kid died? The kid died and she didn't even nurse him for 1 day. So it's zero compliance. So why is divorce valid? Why is it different than the second part of the Mishnah, which is nurse the kid for 2 years and she didn't complete the 2 years? It'd be the same, it should be the same status. She did not fulfill the condition in either scenario. Not sort of a partial fulfillment like it is according to Rava. According to Rava, she did whatever she could. According to Ravashi, she did zero. She had one day opportunity. She had a requirement to do 1 day. She didn't even do that. So the Gemara says, Kasha, it's difficult. Okay, continue tomorrow. Okay.